December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge is raging in the Ardennes forest of eastern Belgium and northern Luxembourg. A surprise German winter offensive aimed at splitting the Allied armies and forcing a negotiated peace. At the center of the German advance lies Bastogne, a small Belgian crossroads town controlling the roads of the Ardennes. American paratroopers are surrounded there, freezing, outnumbered, and running out of ammunition, yet refusing to surrender. When the weather finally clears, everything changes. Allied aircraft return to the skies. General George Patton's Third Army breaks through, relieving Bastogne and shattering the momentum of the German attack. German armored units, short on fuel and under constant air attack, can no longer advance. The offensive collapses. German forces begin retreating east toward Germany, squeezed into narrow winter roads near Bastogne. And at Supreme Headquarters, Dwight D. Eisenhower faces a decision: commit his armies to a dangerous winter encirclement in the Ardennes, or accept that much of the German army would escape and keep the Allied advance intact toward the German heartland. In late December 1944, the crisis in the Ardennes forced Dwight D. Eisenhower to do something rare. He stepped in, personally, and took direct control of the battlefield. The German surprise offensive had torn a hole in the Allied front. Entire American units were cut off. Communications were severed. For days, commanders on the ground struggled to understand where the front line even was. Eisenhower understood that the greatest danger was no longer German tanks, it was chaos. His first priority was not revenge, it was control. He reorganized the front under a single, coherent plan. In the north, he temporarily placed American armies under Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, believing a cautious, methodical defense was better than a fractured response. The decision was controversial, but Eisenhower was managing more than a battlefield. He was managing an alliance. To the south, he turned to George Patton, ordering the Third Army to do the impossible: pivot 90 degrees in the dead of winter and strike north toward Bastogne. Patton began moving before the Germans believed it could be done. Roads clogged with snow, ice, and refugees, yet the advance continued. When Patton's lead elements finally broke through to Bastogne, the German timetable collapsed. For Eisenhower, the immediate crisis was over. But with stability restored, a far greater decision now loomed. In the final days of December 1944, the battlefield in the Ardennes had been transformed. What had begun as Germany's last great offensive was now unraveling into a retreat. East of Bastogne, German divisions, many of them battered, under strength, and short on fuel, were being forced into a shrinking network of icy forest roads leading back toward Germany. This retreat did not resemble an orderly withdrawal. Tanks without fuel were abandoned. Infantry marched without heavy weapons. Supply columns mixed with combat units, creating long, vulnerable traffic jams stretching for miles. From the air, Allied pilots could see it clearly. The weather that had shielded the German advance was gone. Now fight bombers roamed freely, striking bridges, road junctions, and fuel convoys with devastating effect. At Supreme Headquarters, Eisenhower and his staff studied the maps hour by hour. The geography was unmistakable. If Allied forces could strike south from the north and push north from Patton's positions around Bastogne, the retreating German army could be squeezed into a pocket near Houffalize. It would not be a symbolic victory. Tens of thousands of German soldiers could be captured or destroyed, entire divisions that Germany could no longer replace. Some Allied commanders argued this was the decisive moment of the Western War. Destroy the German army here, in the snow and forest of the Ardennes, and the road into Germany would lie open. For Eisenhower, the temptation was real, but so were the risks. To many officers on the ground, the solution seemed obvious: close the pinchers. Finish the German army in the Ardennes. Eisenhower saw the same maps. He understood the opportunity. But as supreme Allied commander, he also understood what the maps did not show. The Ardennes was not open country. It was broken terrain, steep hills, dense forests, narrow roads, and frozen rivers. The same ground that had slowed the German advance now threatened to slow the Allies as well. To encircle the retreating German forces, Eisenhower would have to push his own armies deep into that terrain in the dead of winter, stretching supply lines, exhausting units, and risking chaos at the front. He also feared creating the very conditions that had allowed the German offensive in the first place. A rapid, overextended advance could open gaps, and gaps, Eisenhower knew, were invitations. There was also the problem of time. Every division committed to a risky encirclement in the Ardennes was a division not preparing for the final objective, the Rhine River. Eisenhower's war was never about dramatic victories on the map, it was about momentum. Crossing the Rhine with overwhelming force would break Germany's remaining defenses far more decisively than destroying isolated units in the forest. And then there was the coalition itself. Eisenhower commanded not just armies, but nations. American and British forces had different doctrines, different commanders, and different tolerances for risk. A failed encirclement, or heavy casualties in a battle of choice, could fracture Allied unity at the worst possible moment. Eisenhower chose certainty over spectacle. He ordered pressure, not pursuit, at all costs. Limited attacks to keep the Germans moving, but no all-or-nothing gamble. It was not the decision many wanted, but it was the one Eisenhower believed would win the war. In early January 1945, German forces began pulling out of the Ardennes in earnest. This was not a victorious withdrawal, it was a survival march. Columns moved east through snow and ice, often at night, trying to avoid Allied aircraft. Units that had entered the Ardennes as armored formations now retreated as fragments, tanks without fuel, infantry without artillery, officers without units to command. Allied pressure never stopped. American and British forces attacked along the shoulders of the former Bulge, compressing it day by day. Fight bombers struck bridges, road junctions, and exposed columns whenever weather allowed. But without a full encirclement, escape remained possible. Narrow roads near towns like Houffalize became lifelines. German rearguard units, often SS formations or ad hoc battle groups, fought delaying actions to buy time, sacrificing themselves so others could pass. Tens of thousands of German soldiers made it back across the Auer and Sauer rivers and into the German border regions. They arrived exhausted, wounded, and shattered, but still alive. The German army in the west was not destroyed in the Ardennes. It was bled, battered, and broken, yet still capable of resistance. For Allied soldiers who had fought through Bastogne and the frozen forests, the sight was frustrating. The enemy they had nearly trapped was slipping away. Eisenhower had achieved what he intended. The front was stabilized, the German offensive was finished, and Allied momentum remained intact. But the cost of that decision was now clear. The war in the West would not end in the Ardennes. By February 1945, the consequences of Eisenhower's decision were unmistakable. The German army that escaped the Ardennes did not escape unscathed. Its best remaining armored units had been mauled. Fuel reserves were exhausted. Equipment losses could no longer be replaced. More importantly, Germany's final offensive in the West was over. There would be no second surprise. Eisenhower's armies, meanwhile, remained intact. Supply lines were secure. Command structures were stable. The Allied coalition had weathered its most dangerous test. Within weeks, Allied forces stood on the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier protecting Germany itself. When the crossings came, they came with overwhelming force. Yet the cost of allowing the German escape was equally real. The soldiers who withdrew from the Ardennes would fight again, in the Siegfried Line, in the Ruhr, and in the desperate defense of Germany's cities. The war continued into the spring of 1945. Cities burned, civilians fled. Millions more would die before the final surrender in May. Eisenhower had avoided a gamble, but he had not avoided bloodshed. His decision traded a chance at a shorter war for certainty and control. It was a choice shaped by caution, coalition politics, and the brutal memory of wars lost by overreach. Whether it was the right choice depends on the question you ask. Should a commander risk everything for total victory, or is the greater responsibility to ensure that victory, once achieved, cannot be lost? In the winter of 1944, Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a decision no map could answer for him. He could gamble on a final crushing blow in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, or accept an incomplete victory and keep the Allied war machine intact. Eisenhower chose control. He allowed much of the German army to escape the Ardennes, not because he failed to see the opportunity, but because he refused to risk everything on it. The choice did not bring an early end to the war. It did not deliver a dramatic encirclement or a final battle before Christmas, but it ensured something Eisenhower valued more than spectacle, a war that could not be lost. When Allied forces crossed the Rhine, they did so with overwhelming strength. Germany's defeat, once delayed, became inevitable. Eisenhower's decision remains controversial because it forces an uncomfortable question. Is the truest measure of leadership the ability to know when not to gamble? In the end, the German army survived the Battle of the Bulge. Germany did not.